Hey everybody, welcome to another Making Stuff video. Today I'm going to start a mostly printed CNC machine. Now this isn't one of my designs. This is a design that became popular maybe about a year ago, and there's a web page totally devoted to the mostly printed CNC machine where there's instructions and you can download the files, and everything you need to know about the machine is over at that web page, and I've got a link to it in the description of this video. Now, one of the things I like about the mostly printed CNC machine is you can make it your own. And what I mean by that is you can make it any width, length, height, however you want the machine. You just cut the conduit pieces to the size that you want. You can also put any type of tool on it that you want. You can put a router, you can put a laser engraver, you can put an extruder and make it a 3D printer. You can even put a plasma torch on there and make it a plasma cutter. So this is my build of the mostly printed CNC machine. So I'm going to put one of these together today, so let's get started. Okay, so if you want to make your own mostly printed CNC machine, the first thing you're going to have to do is print out all the parts. Now, I've got a link to the mostly printed CNC webpage that's got all of the files and the documentation and everything I'm going to forget to tell you about in this video. It's all located there, and there's a link in the description of the video. So while you're there, consider subscribing. Now, there's a few things you're going to need to do before you just start assembling the machine. And the first thing you want to do is to check the holes on all of your parts and make sure they don't need to be reamed out. Now my machine, my 3D printer, seems to be doing a pretty good job here, and these holes seem to be spot on. But you'll want to check that on your machine, and I would go through and just do it all at once, and it'll save you a whole bunch of headache later on down the line. Now, in addition to printing out all the parts, you're going to have to go get you a bunch of hardware, like a whole bunch of lock washers, tons of 5/16 bolts, and like I said, I've got a link to all of the parts and everything in the description of the video. It's going to take 50 something bearings, if I remember right, and these are the roller skate bearings. You can get like packs of 50 and 100 of these online for around $25, $30, I think it was. And I've got links to that on the description of the video. You're also going to need stepper motors, which these are NEMA 17s. So I've got enough to get the machine started. So this video, I'm going to assemble the machine, and then I will probably go into wiring and electronics in a second video. Now, in addition to the 3D printed files and all of the hardware and motors and miscellaneous parts, you're going to have to go to your hardware store or your big box store and pick you up two 10-foot sections of 3/4 inch conduit. Now, be sure and get the right files for the type of conduit you have, because in the US it's 3/4 inch, and I believe in other parts of the country it's 25 millimeters. And there are definitely two different sets of files for the type of conduit that you're going to use. So I would get your conduit first and then measure it and then go and print out all of your pieces. So I'm going to head over to the saw now and cut all of these pieces to length. Okay, so after you have cut all of your conduit, you're going to want to pick yourself up one of these conduit reamers, and I've got a link to this in the description. It only costs about $20. It's worth every penny of it, because what it's going to do is it's going to take a rough piece of conduit like this after it's gone through the saw. You can see how this has got the burr on the end of it, and it's going to turn it into a clean cut piece of conduit like this. And this is going to be very beneficial because it's going to keep from cutting the 3D printed parts. The conduit pieces are going to slide on there a whole lot easier. And we're also going to be running some wiring through this conduit, and that'll help keep the wiring from getting cut. And that's exactly what this is for. It's electrical conduit. All right, so now I'm going to assemble the legs of the machine, and there are different orientations of the parts, and you want to make sure that you get the parts to line up, but not only lining up with the shape and the slot here, but there's also this letter C here, and you want to make sure that the C's line up, because it is possible to put the wrong pieces together. They'll line up, but they won't be in the right orientation. So make sure that those C's line up. So what I'm going to do is put this together, and the way that I'm going to do this is put the number 6 screw through the top, and it is recessed in there. So let's give it a little help. All right, and then I'm going to take a lock nut and put it in here and hold it in place with my finger and get it started. And then once it's started, I'm going to take a 5/16 nut driver and hold that nut in place. Then I can just tighten it all up. And with these plastic pieces, you want to make sure you don't want to get it too tight, because you'll crack the plastic. So, and also right now you don't want to tighten all of your screws. We're going to do that later when we get all of the machine assembled. And then once I've got this top piece assembled, I'm going to put one of the legs in. You want to make sure it goes all the way down to the bottom. And then it's just as simple as putting the screw and a lock nut together, like so. Like I said, I'm not tightening this down. I'm just making it just snug so the part won't come out. And then you take the bottom piece, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that it's lined up with the bottom. So I just put it on a flat piece, something flat, and push down on it and just make sure that that's flush with the bottom. And then again, you just take a number 6 screw and the lock nut, and you put these together. Not too tight, but snug enough where it won't fall apart. Then that's how you make a leg. So I've got all 4 of these legs put together now, and you can see here on the top that these little triangles they point in different directions, and that's what I'm talking about, the orientation. But you can see here I've got those little letter C's all line up, so I know that these parts are correctly assembled. All right, now I'm going to install the roller assembly. There's 4 of these, and just the one thing you need to keep in mind on these is there are these little indentions here, and that's where the bearings go. So the bearings are going to go on this side, and it's the same on this plate. See, there's a smooth side, and then there's a side that has that same little indention, and the bearings go up against those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 5/16 nut here, or bolt rather, and just run it through these 3 bearings, like so. And then I'm going to take the plate and I'm going to run the bolts through that, and then put a bearing on like so. And then these bearings here are the ones that your belt are going to ride on. And then you'll need 2 more bearings, and they go in here in these 2 little grooves. Oops. Like so. And then you want to make sure that this flat piece is up and then this curved piece is facing down. And then just put the final 2 nuts on here. And then the only thing left to do is to tighten these up. And when you tighten them, you want to make sure they're tight enough that the bearing doesn't move. You don't want any like side to side play in the bearing. but you don't want to over tighten it either. So I've got that really good and snug, and you see the bearing, there's no, I'm trying to move it back and forth. There's no, I cannot move that bearing, but it spins freely, and that's about how tight you want to get all the bolts. Like I said, you'll have to do that 4 times, then you'll have 4 roller assemblies. The next step in the assembly process is to assemble the middle assembly, and that begins with these 2 XYZ pieces, and all we're really doing is just adding 4 bearings so that it looks like this, and you just want to make sure that the nuts go through and so that they're on the back side, because if they're here on the front, they may interfere with the movement of this assembly. And once you get these nuts on here, go ahead and snug them down just like on the roller assemblies, because we'll be done with this piece. Next, we're going to take our XY pieces and we're going to put 4 bearings in these 4 holes right here. And when you're done, it should look like this. And then we're also going to put a bearing right here in this piece. Now this is the one that has 1 hole in it, not 2 like this. And it should also have the letter C on here. So you're going to put your bearing in here like so. Now this one you don't want to snug down. You want to leave it loose because we're going to use it to tension one of the axes later in the assembly process. So then when you've got your piece assembled, it should look exactly like this, with 2 bearings on the top and 3 on the bottom. Alright, so now I'm going to assemble all these pieces into one assembly, and we will start with our XYZ piece, and there are 2 holes. We're going to run the 5-inch bolt through the smaller of the 2 holes. Then we're going to take a spacer, and we're also going to run that through the small hole. Next, we're going to take the XY piece, and we're going to have this long piece here facing down. And if you see here on the top, there's the 2 holes again. We're going to also run that bolt through the smaller of the 2 holes. So then everything should line up here, like this bolt here. And then you should have this running all the way through, and you can see right here, there's a bearing that goes in there. So I'm going to back this off just a little bit, and then I'm going to install this bearing right here in the center. Alright, so when it's all put together, it should look like this. These bolt holes here should line up. You should have your captured bearing here in the center, and you should be able to see all the way down through this larger hole here, because that's where our threaded rod's going to go through. So now I'm going to add the next XY assembly, and we're going to have the longer piece facing up this time. And then we also have the 2 holes here, and we're going to also run that through the smaller of the 2 holes. Put them together, and it should look like this. And these bolt holes here at the top should now line up, and that way you'll know that you've got this on here the correct orientation. And we also need to add the captured bearing right here in this second XY piece. So I'm just going to back that off a little bit and then drop the bearing down in here and then slide everything right back together. So now I'm almost done. I've got the second XY piece on there. The only thing left to do now is to add another spacer. Then also add another XYZ piece here on the top. And then that should have everything all put together. You'll want to take another lock nut and put it on the top. And you only want it tight enough that the threads catch that nylon in that lock nut, because we're going to adjust this for the tension on the axis later on in the assembly. So you want to leave that part loose. And when we're done, the assembly should look like this. You've got the captured bearings right here on both sides. And you also want to leave these loose, because we're going to use this to tension some of the axis later on in the assembly. Now the only thing left to do is add this T8 nut for our threaded rod. That goes right here on the top, and it's held in place by some M3 screws. Now these screws go into the plastic, so they kind of self-tap themselves into the plastic, so you want to be real easy with them. There's no need to torque them down, because the only thing these screws do is keep that nut from twisting. So once you get it in place, it says in the instructions you really only need one, but I've put 2 of those in there for good measure. But once you get those screwed in there, that completes the assembly process of this middle assembly. All right, so now that the middle assembly is complete, I'm going to run some conduit through the X and the Y axis bearings. And then I'm going to take a square and just make sure, just double check and make sure that these 2 pieces are perpendicular to each other, and they are. So now I'm going to tighten these middle bearings that we left loose, and I'm going to snug them up, but I don't want them so tight that these bind when they travel through here. Next, I'm going to take the Z-axis and install it on the middle assembly. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tighten up these outside bolts so we can snug that bearing up, but we don't want it to bind. We want a good tight fit, but we don't want it to bind. All right, so I've got it all assembled, and I have double checked and made sure that every one of these bearings is making contact. None of them are spinning freely. I've also tightened these bolts down. I've tightened them all down to where I get a good snug fit on the bearing, but it doesn't bind. Now, I have noticed there's this kind of a ratcheting noise. I don't know if you can hear that. When I move this axis, it's got just that clickety-clack noise. And what's happened here is the conduit that I purchased, it has these guidelines. I guess it's for measurement, so you could easily just cut it. Because, I mean, this is electrical conduit, and it's engraved into the metal. So when I cut these pieces for the Z-axis, I wasn't really paying attention to the engraving. And what has happened is, I think it's this piece here, it's actually riding on one of these bearings, so that's that rough noise. It's not, I mean, it's a smooth action and everything, it just has that noise. So I've got some extra conduit, and I think what I'm going to do is go back and cut another piece for here so that it's not riding on those bearings, and then that'll smooth this out a little bit. All right, next I'm going to mount the NEMA 17 stepper motors, and I'm going to be putting them on the motor mounts. And that's very simple. They just go like this, and you want to make sure that the shaft is sticking out of the flat side here, like so. And then it's just as simple as putting in 4 M3 screws. And hopefully, if you're following along at home, you have already reamed out your holes like I did at the beginning of the video. So then these should just go in with no problem. Then when you're done, you will have 4 of them that look just like this. All right, so now that I have got all of the pieces assembled, I'm going to put the machine together. And one thing you want to do on the legs is you want to make sure that these little slanted sides are facing out and the flat sides are facing in towards each other like this. And then I have also went ahead and I put a roller on each shaft, and this is the outside here. You want this side facing outwards. So I'm going to put a piece. These are the Y rails, and these will be the X rails. And before you install them, you want to put one of these on each of the corners. So I will do that right now. And then I will install the X rails, like so. Remember, keep the plates facing outwards. So next I'm going to take the corner pieces, and again we want this slanted side facing inward, or I mean outward rather, and we want the flat side facing inward. And we're just going to go around and put these on each corner, like so. And then I'm going to take the number 6 screws and tighten all 4 of the corners down. Okay, so I've got all the screws installed in the corners, and I've tightened the screws down, but you don't want them snug because you still want to be able to twist these rails like so, because we're going to have to get everything lined up now for the middle assembly and the Z-axis. So now I'm just going to install some pieces of conduit, here in the middle assembly, like so, and then we will put it into place. And then get everything all lined up. All right, and now I am ready to put the motors here on the roller assemblies. Now, to put the motor on the roller assembly, I want to have the shaft of the motor facing outwards. And there is a slot in the back of the roller assembly, and you have to push the nut into the slot so that it becomes kind of like a captured nut. Well, not kind of, it is a captured nut. And I'm going to push it in here and get it lined up. There's 2 screws, so you have to put one on each side. Then you can place a motor on top and take your number 6 screws. I think I got one too long. Nope. And then go ahead and tighten these down. All right, so I've got all of the pieces hooked up and bolted and screwed together. I made sure all of the little guide marks and engravings on the conduit was facing down where the bearings will not ride over it. And it seems like I've got pretty good smooth motion here. So that pretty much has got the gantry and frame and assembly all put together. The only thing I need to do now is go back and tighten up these corner screws. And then one other thing to be mindful of if you're going to make one of these at home is you want your tool mount to be in your XY0 position, or facing it rather. So this is going to be my X0, Y0. So I've got my tool mount facing this corner right here. So that pretty much wraps up this video. In future videos, I'm going to be working on electronics, wiring, and software. So be sure and subscribe and ring that bell so you're notified when those videos are uploaded. If you like this video, give me the big thumbs up, and thanks for watching.